you buy a home, you get a deed, you move in. And then, every month, you also pay rent. Not to a landlord, because you own the house, to the owner of the ground it is sitting on. Here is the problem, and it is not the arrangement itself. It is which half of your address goes up in value. The house is a manufactured product. Like most manufactured products, it tends to lose value as it ages. The land is land. Over a long enough period, land in a place people want to live tends to do the opposite. You own the first one, you rent the second one, and that sentence is not this channel's accusation. It is written in almost exactly those words in consumer guidance published by the industry itself. It just never appears in the same paragraph as a sentence about how much cheaper it is to get started. About half of manufactured homes in the United States sit on land somebody else owns. This is Policy Unpacked, where we read the documents that decide things and show you where to find your own. Scope. This describes common arrangements in United States manufactured housing communities and a related structure called a ground lease. Terms vary enormously by state and by community, and some states have specific protections that others do not. Nothing here is financial or legal advice, and nothing here is an argument that anybody made a bad decision. And one thing needs saying plainly before anything else, because a lot of coverage of this subject gets the tone wrong. Manufactured housing is a large, legitimate, and often excellent part of American housing. For an enormous number of households, it is the only route to owning a home at all, and this episode is not going to be sniffy about that for a single sentence. What it is going to do is explain the two contracts, because the arithmetic in them is not obvious and almost nobody explains it before somebody signs. And if you already live in one of these communities, you probably know most of the mechanics better than we do. The part worth staying for is the second half, where the two documents start affecting each other. Start with the structure, because it is unusual and most homebuyers never encounter it. In a land lease community, you own the home. That is real ownership. You have title to it, you can sell it, you can improve it, you can pass it on. And you lease the lot. The industry term for what you pay is lot rent, and its main function is to secure your right to occupy that specific piece of ground. So there are two documents. One says the house is yours. One says the ground is somebody else's, and you may stand your house on it under agreed terms. Most homebuyers in this country never think about that line, because for them, it does not exist. The deed they sign covers the house and the ground in one instrument, and the two are welded together for as long as they own it. Here they are, separate. Two signatures, two counterparties, two sets of terms, one address. And the reason that matters is that the two documents run on completely different clocks. Your deed does not expire. It has no renewal date and no annual review. The lease on the ground has both. Lot rent usually covers more than the dirt. Maintenance of common areas, landscaping, road upkeep, snow clearance. In some communities, it includes utilities such as water, sewer, and refuse collection. Those are real services with real costs, and somebody has to pay for them. This is not a fee for nothing. A homeowner on land they own pays for the same things, just separately and mostly invisibly. The plow that clears their street comes out of a municipal budget funded by their property tax. Their own driveway comes out of their own pocket in a bad year. Bundling all of that into one monthly number is genuinely easier to plan around, and plenty of people choose it for exactly that reason. The complication is not what lot rent buys. It is what happens to the two halves of your address over 20 years. And before that, the reason the arrangement exists, because it is a good one and it explains why so many people choose it. No land purchase is required, which reduces the upfront cost enormously. For a great many households, that is not a marginal saving. It is the difference between owning a home this year and renting for another decade while trying to save for land as well. So the trade is legible and it is voluntary. Lower entry cost in exchange for a monthly payment on the ground. And it is worth comparing that, honestly, to the alternative, which is renting an apartment. A renter pays a monthly amount and owns nothing at the end of it. A household in a land lease community pays a monthly amount and owns a house at the end of it. That is unambiguously better, and any account of this subject that skips it is not describing the real choice people are making. The comparison that produces the difficult arithmetic is not renting. It is buying a house on land you also own, which is a comparison most of these households were never in a position to make. So, what does that trade actually cost over time? 3 things, and the first 2 are stated openly in the industry's own consumer material. 1. The monthly payment can increase, and you have less control over it than you would over a fixed mortgage payment. That is a significant difference, and it is worth sitting with. A fixed-rate mortgage is one of the few large expenses in ordinary life that does not move. 20 years in, you are paying the same number in a world where everything else has gone up. Lot rent is not that. It is a rent, and rents are reviewed. And who does? The reviewing is a question that turns out to have a different answer in year 15 than it did on the day you signed. 2. And this is the sentence that matters most in the entire episode. You build equity in the home, but not in the land. The land's appreciation benefits the community owner. Read that next to the first fact, which is that a manufactured home generally depreciates. You are building equity in the depreciating half and paying rent on the appreciating half. Both of those can be true while every party behaves entirely properly, and both are. On its own, neither half is strange. Plenty of people own things that lose value. A car loses value from the first week, and nobody considers that a scandal. And plenty of people rent things that gain value, which is what every apartment tenant in the country is doing. What is unusual is doing both at the same address for the same shelter on a 20-year horizon, while the arrangement is described as home ownership. Because home ownership, in every other context in American life, is the main way an ordinary household ends up holding an appreciating asset. And in that other context, a good part of what the household ends up holding comes from the ground rather than from the structure. The building ages. The location is what carries the value forward. In a land lease community, that side of the ledger is not in your column. 3. And this one is not in the brochures because it only appears later. The word mobile does a lot of misleading work. Moving a manufactured home is a real engineering operation, and whether it is practical depends heavily on the age and condition of the home. Older homes frequently cannot be moved safely at all. This episode is not going to give you a cost figure for that, because a reliable one was not available, and inventing one would be worse than saying nothing. But the direction matters. If relocation is difficult, then the thing you own has most of its value in exactly one place, and that place is rented. And notice how different that is from the usual homeowner position. Somebody with a mortgage and a garden who dislikes their neighborhood can sell and move, and the asset travels with them as money. Here, the asset is a physical object with a location problem, and the monthly cost of that location is set by somebody else. And that changes what a rent increase means. For an apartment tenant, an increase they cannot live with is unwelcome, but it is answerable. They can look at what else is available, and if the numbers are better somewhere else, they move. The lease ends, the boxes go in a van, and that is the end of the relationship. If your house is the thing that would have to move, that option is a great deal more complicated. You are not comparing a rent to another rent. You are weighing it against selling a home you own or against an engineering job on a structure whose feasibility depends on how old it is, which sets up the situation this whole structure turns on. And it is the one people write to advice columns about. Land is an asset. Assets get sold. And the ground under a community is no different. When it changes hands, nothing happens to your deed. You still own your home. That part is untouched. What changes is the other contract. A new owner acquired the land at a price and now has to earn a return on that price. If they paid more than the previous owner, the arithmetic they are working with is different from the arithmetic the previous owner was working with. And this is the same shape as the third episode of this season. There, 3 companies stood behind a new apartment building, and the one you could telephone was the one with the least authority to decide anything. Here, the community manager you speak to every week is, again, usually executing a number rather than choosing it. So consider what a resident is actually holding at that moment. A home they own outright. That is a genuine asset, and it is theirs. A lot rent that has been reviewed upward. A home that may be expensive or impractical to move. And a buyer for that home, if they decide to sell, who will have to accept the same lot rent, which affects what they are willing to pay. That last one is the part that surprises people most. The rent on the ground affects the resale value of the house because the next buyer is buying both. Think about what a buyer is actually doing when they look at your home. They are not pricing a house. They are pricing a house plus a monthly obligation that comes with it and that they cannot negotiate. So every dollar of lot rent is a dollar of somebody else's future budget, and it comes off what they can offer you for the structure. The lease follows the address, and the address is what they are buying. So the 2 contracts are not independent after all. The value of the thing you own is partly set by the terms of the thing you rent, which is the quiet part of the whole arrangement. You can maintain your home perfectly for 20 years, replace the roof, keep the garden immaculate, and still watch what it is worth move because of a document you did not write and cannot amend. And this is not a rare or exotic structure. It is the same legal shape as a commercial ground lease, where a building is owned by one party and the land under it by another, typically on terms running 50 to 99 years. Large office buildings sit on exactly this arrangement. It is well understood by the parties involved, who have lawyers. The difference here is not the structure. It is who is on the other side of it. And that asymmetry is the thing worth doing something about, because it is the one part of this that a household can actually change in an evening. So here is the practical part, and it applies whether you are considering a community like this or already live in one. First, read the lot lease and find the section on increases. What is the mechanism? Is there a cap, a notice period, a formula, an index, or is it at the owner's discretion with notice? That single clause tells you more about your next 20 years than the current rent does. A lease that ties increases to a published index behaves in a way you can plan around, even in a bad year. A lease that leaves the number to the owner's discretion with 30 days of notice behaves in a way you cannot. Same house, same street, completely different decision. Second, find out who owns the land right now, and this channel has already given you the method. Your county property record site, search the address, read the grantee on the most recent deed. If it is an entity, take that name to the business registry of the state where it was formed. And if you hit the wall we described in the last episode, you now know exactly what that wall is. Third, check the date of the last sale. A community that changed hands recently is one where the new owner is working from a fresh set of numbers. Fourth, and this one is specific to your state, look up whether your state has protections for residents of manufactured home communities. Some states have notice requirements, rent regulations for these communities specifically, or a right of first refusal that gives residents an opportunity if it is put up for sale. Those provisions vary enormously, and this episode is not going to summarize 50 states. But the existence of that category of law is worth knowing because a resident who does not know it exists will not look for it. And fifth, if you are buying, ask what the lot rent was 3 years ago and 5 years ago, not what it is, what it was. The trend is the information. A community that has raised lot rent modestly and predictably for a decade is telling you something. So is one that has raised it sharply since changing hands. Neither of those is a promise about the future, but one of them is a much better basis for a 20-year decision than a number on a brochure. And if you already live in a community and none of that is news to you, there is still one thing worth doing this week. Find out who owns the ground right now and write the name down somewhere you will find it again. Because the day that name changes is the day the terms you have been living under start being reconsidered by somebody with a fresh spreadsheet. Knowing it changed on the week it changes rather than a year later is most of the advantage available to you here. So who owns the ground under your house? In about half of manufactured housing in this country, somebody who is not you. And the honest verdict has two halves that have to be held at the same time, because taking either one on its own gives a false picture. The first half. This arrangement lets people own homes who otherwise could not, and that is not a small thing. Removing the land purchase removes the single largest barrier to entry in American housing. Millions of households are better off for it. The second half. The structure separates the asset that depreciates from the asset that appreciates and gives the household the first one. Both are true. Neither cancels the other. The mistake most coverage of this subject makes is picking one. Tell only the first half and you have written a brochure. Tell only the second half and you have written something that reads as pity, aimed at people who made a rational decision with the options actually in front of them. The useful version is the one that puts both sentences in the same paragraph and lets you decide what weight to give each of them for your own household. What is genuinely unusual here is that nobody hid the second half. It is in the consumer material, written by the industry, in plain language. It simply appears 3 paragraphs after the sentence about how much less you need to get started, and almost nobody reads down that far before signing. Which is, in the end, what this channel is for. 5 files in, and that closes the housing half of this season. 1 house through 4 owners. Who sets the rent? 3 companies behind a new building, a company with no name in it, and now a deed that covers the house but not the ground. Every one of them was the same finding in a different costume. The name you deal with is not the party deciding, and the document you signed covers less than you assumed. So does that mechanism only apply to buildings? Next file. A pediatric clinic with the same sign it has had for 20 years, the same doctor, the same waiting room, and a different owner. Nothing about the name on the door changed. Almost everything behind it did. This is Policy Unpacked. Subscribe, and we will read the next one.